Wait, how does this work?
You just press the button.
This one?
No, not that one.
You're listening to Press the Button, a Ploughshares Fund podcast dedicated to nuclear policy and national security.
Everything seems impossible till it happens.
Everyone would be affected by a nuclear war.
Our government is planning to spend trillions of dollars to develop new nuclear weapons that we don't need.
You can't win a nuclear war.
We are all experts on nuclear weapons because we are all going to be affected by those nuclear weapons.
And here are your hosts, Joe Cirincione and Michelle Dover.
Welcome back. We turned 40 today. This is our 40th episode.
It seems like only yesterday we were turning 21.
We had drinks when we were leaving.
I know. So what happens when we turn 40, Joe?
Cigars? I don't know. I don't smoke. Well, we have a full episode for you. We're going to cover all the news, the facts, the lies around the Iran crisis, and then take a deep dive into U.S. nuclear policy.
Today for Early Warning, we're joined by Kizer of Win Without War, one of the organizations that helped lead the demonstrations last week, to talk specifically about that news and also what comes next and what listeners should be doing.
And then what?
And then for the question and answer session, I'm asking you a question that we received from one of our Twitter followers about Department of Energy priorities.
All right, we'll go into that. And for the interview, we really were honored to have Ivo Daalder join us. He's the president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs, the former U.S. ambassador to NATO, and a longtime colleague of mine. I used to kind of work for Ivo back in 2007 when I joined the national security team for the Barack Obama campaign. He was the head of that team. I think there was maybe four of us. That Obama was the decisive underdog, but he is more than most people in this town, deeply grounded in the history of U.S. nuclear policy, has a moral center on what that U.S. nuclear policy should be. And he joins us for one in a series of interviews we're doing on lessons learned. Having gone through this with such high hopes, what did we learn from that exercise? How can we do it better if we get the chance to have a new nuclear policy in 2021?
This is one interview you're really not going to want to miss. But as always, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share. If you agree with me and you like what you hear, we take your feedback seriously.
We got a lot to cover, and the clock is ticking.
And now, Early Warning. Early Warning. Early Warning. Early Warning. A 7-minute synopsis of this week's nuclear news.
Thanks, Dal. Today on Early Warning, we are focusing on two questions. What do we know about the escalation we saw last week between the United States and Iran? And what should we be doing about it now? Here to answer these questions are Kate Kizer, Policy Director at Win Without War, and Tom Collina, Policy Director here at Ploughshares Fund. Kate, Tom, do you think we can cover this in 7 minutes?
No problem.
Let's try. Our time starts now. Tom, over the weekend, we saw the Trump administration's story about when and why it decided to kill General Soleimani fall apart. What do we actually know about this strike and the following actions?
Thanks, Michelle. I think there's two important questions to answer here. One is, was this attack legal? And the other is, was it smart? Does it make America safer? And I think we can answer no to both questions. On the first, it is now becoming clear that there is no evidence that there was an imminent threat that justified this attack. And we're now seeing reports that this attack was in fact planned months ago. And it means you simply can't go and kill people just because you think they may be a danger to the United States at some point. This was not self-defense. This was, in fact, U.S. assassination of a foreign leader. And now, was this attack smart? Did it make us safer? And again, I think the answer is no. This attack could have easily led to a disastrous war with Iran. And that was only prevented because Iran was very measured in its response. And we got lucky. They didn't have to be that restrained. You could also say that even their restrained attack could have led to American deaths in Iraq. That was not actually in their control as much as they tried. So I really do think that we dodged a bullet on this one. The U.S. attack has also undermined the U.S. position in Iraq. We now see Iraq calling for the removal of U.S. troops. I actually think that would be a good idea to remove U.S. troops, but that's not what President Trump intended. So unintended consequences. Certainly the downing of the Ukrainian airliner also falls into unintended consequences, a real tragedy. But when you go to the brink of war, bad things happen. Even though this is creating a lot of domestic trouble for the Iranian regime, I think this attack has in general made Iranian hardliners stronger. It supported their position against further engagement with the United States. And finally, it has pushed Iran to take steps away from the Iran nuclear deal and possibly restart elements of their nuclear program. So none of these things are what the U.S. wants. President Trump's actions assassinating General Soleimani have made us less safe.
Thanks, Tom. And I think it's also, as well, putting this in the broader context of these are just a series of actions in a longer ongoing relationship. Iran is likely to take more steps. The U.S. is likely to take more steps. We're clearly not out of the woods yet. Kate, when we talk about this potential for war, what does the American public think? Do they want a war?
The people in the United States have been really unequivocal in their opposition to a war with Iran, whether that's back in 2007 when the Bush administration tried to take us to war, or now when Trump has really taken unprecedented action to take us to the brink of war. And so there's been recent polling showing, again, that the American public opposes a war. And not only that, that they believe, clear majorities believe that Trump's actions to assassinate Soleimani have made the United States less safe. And with good reason. It has made us less safe. There was no reason really strategically to do this except to provoke Iran into a conflict.
So when we talk about the American public, what they think about a war, what were their actions? What did you see last week in terms of the demonstrations that Win Without War led along with its partners?
So it was a really exciting result. Last Thursday, there was a national day of action, and across the United States, there were over 375 different events from places as far as Washington, D.C., to California, to Sedona, Arizona, to Kansas, where folks took direct action to demand no war with Iran. That took the form of vigils, to protests, to marches, regular folks just standing on the sides of streets with signs declaring no war with Iran. And I think it was a really exciting translation of what the polling says into direct action to make policymakers in Congress actually take note that they actually need to be listening to the people who elected them and not to a war-hungry administration.
And I was just so struck, I don't know about you, Tom, because I know you were at one of the demonstrations, about the response from political leaders, the response from groups across the sector. I mean, this was a huge effort by so many different organizations.
It was really exciting. We came together, Win Without War, with Move On and the National Iranian American Council to organize these events. And we had dozens of representatives come out and speak at the protests in D.C. It also happened to be when the House of Representatives was voting on legislation to restrict the president's war powers, to prevent more war. And more legislation has already been introduced to defund an authorized war and get rid of the legal authorities that the administration is claiming that they can go to war under.
When you talk about this new legislation that's been introduced, I mean, that was my next question. So the demonstrations are over. As Tom was talking about, the cycle of escalation seems to be on a downturn for the moment. What should listeners be doing next?
So I think one thing is not to rest on our laurels. It's really clear that the administration is going to continue to escalate, if not militarily, economically. They already announced a new blanket set of sanctions on a different economic sector in Iran. And so the American public has a really great opportunity next week when Congress is in recess and many members of Congress will go home to their districts to attend town halls, organize district meetings, and ask their members of Congress to support legislation to defund an authorized war, support the War Powers Resolution that the House already passed, as well as repeal the 2002 Iraq War authorization that the administration is trying to claim gives them the authority to kill people in Iraq who are Iranian.
So let's say I'm a listener in Lansing, Michigan. Where do I go to find all of this information?
So you can go to winwithoutwar.org, NIAC.org, moveon.org, or nowarwithiran.org to find more information and resources on how you can take action and still make an impact, because regular folks' voices are so important at this moment in time. That's really what's going to take us back from the brink.
Kate, Tom, our 7 minutes are up. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for having us.
Letters, we get letters. We get stacks and stacks of letters.
Joe, today's first question comes from Twitter. We are in the future. Are you ready for this?
Wow, let's go.
So the question comes from Rad Nuke, and it's actually about Department of Energy. So just for listeners, remember, you can tweet or DM us your questions. We're at PressButtonPod on Twitter. The question is, what should be the new Secretary of Energy, Dan Briette's top priorities in the nuclear field? And how should he steer the department and the National Nuclear Security Administration to achieve them?
Good question. And this is from @RadNuke. That's who it is. Okay. Good question. Let me try to answer that in two ways. Let me tell you what his priorities are going to be, and then I'll tell you what they should be. What they are going to be is keeping the money moving. That is the number one job of the Secretary of Energy. Make sure the contracts are getting signed and implemented. Get the money out the door as fast as you can. He's the Secretary of Energy in charge of a number of things. But as the former Secretary of Energy, what was his name? The guy from Texas who just left?
Oh, Rick Perry.
Rick Perry. See how inconsequential cabinet members are in this administration. They come and go. We hardly get to know them, and they're gone. So Rick Perry. He thought that the Department of Energy dealt with oil and gas. Well, not really. One of its big jobs, as you know, Michelle, having worked there, is they are the steward of America's nuclear arsenal. So they oversee the national laboratories and the production facilities where we make the material for these weapons, and they oversee their production. Early on, the bombings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the government decided they did not want the military to have control of the nuclear weapons. They put them under civilian hands, and they eventually ended up with, after the Department of Energy was created, is handing that over to the Department of Energy. Nuclear energy seemed logical. I don't know. And so what they will do is keep the production pipelines going. In the recently passed NDAA, there's increases in material production. There's this arbitrary, unnecessary requirement now to produce 80 pits a year, to 80 plutonium pits, things we don't need, cannot afford, are going to spend a fortune on. He will make sure that we do that. I have to say on the sort of the positive side, I don't want to be completely cynical. What he does do is make sure we are upholding the highest standards of quality and professionalism. And I think by and large, NNSA does that. What does it stand for?
The National Nuclear Security Administration.
Thank you very much. And by and large, they do that. I think this is a professional team of people. I've been out to the labs. You've been out to the labs. I mean, these are really hardworking. Some of the best scientists in the country are there. They're dedicated to their job. They're patriots. So when I criticize our policies, I'm not criticizing the people who are implementing these policies, the people who are working on this. I tell you what they should be doing. What he should be doing is having a responsible, structured, planned out build down of our nuclear facilities. We don't need all the infrastructure we have. There's no reason why we have to have 3 laboratories working on nuclear weapons. It's an artifact of history. It's a rivalry between Robert Oppenheimer and Ed Teller that led to the creation of Lawrence Livermore National Laboratories after all. Teller wanted his own lab, so they gave it to him. And then we have Sandia, who does some of the work over in New Mexico. Most of it's done at Los Alamos. We could be downsizing this. We could be restructuring the Pantex facility out in Texas from building nuclear weapons to disassembling nuclear weapons, shifting the priorities there. Actually, Michelle, what do you think about this? You're the one who actually worked there. I've just been looking at it from a few blocks away. The Forrestal building where their headquarters is about, 10 blocks from our office here in Washington, D.C. What did you think working there?
Thanks, Joe. And many thanks to the fellowship and GFP that got me in. From my time there, from the friends I still have there, and from watching what the Department of Energy and the NNSA have been doing, I have a couple thoughts. One, I think one of his priorities should be getting a handle on the enterprise. I think there is a lot of questions about project management. I mean, just remember, the labs are not actually an office of the Department of Energy. They're run by contractors. There's a lot of questions about what management looks like out there, what the efficiency is, what the point of it is. To your point about keeping the money moving, his goal is to keep the money moving, but he should really be looking at the reasons for doing it and making sure that the enterprise is actually even fitting the goals that he hopes to accomplish there. I also come from Eastern Washington, grew up right near the Hanford site.
Absolutely.
I think one of his top priorities should be environmental cleanup in the United States. And a lot of that has to do with the project management and oversight from the Department of Energy.
And the priorities. The Hanford sites is a disaster. What is it? Millions of tons of radioactive waste from the creation of our earliest nuclear weapons, still there, still not safely stored. And just last month, out in New Mexico, wasn't there a scandal involving the shipment, the accidents involving
exactly. The transuranic.
That's the word I was looking for.
transuranic byproduct, I believe. And so the other piece of it, though, is as well, the questions about secure transport, the questions about aging facilities. There are, this is an enterprise that actually really needs a close look at what its goal is in this day and age and making sure it is not on autopilot from the early years of the Cold War. The other thing that he is really going to have a challenge with, I think, is that Department of Energy typically has one of the lowest morales among staff of all the departments. And so I think finding a way to actually, I have great respect for the folks who work there, but I think one of his priorities should actually be figuring out how to fix some of those problems and how to motivate the workforce in order to get these really key national security jobs done.
Someday we'll have a president that actually transforms our nuclear policy, breaks with Cold War thinking, and puts these scientists, professionals, and engineers and technicians on a real path that can improve our national security, not just spend the money.
Exactly.
Thanks for asking the question, Michelle, and thank you, Rad Nuke, for sending it in.
Thanks, Joe. Another week, another question.
Hi, I'm Alyssa Kareem, Development Associate at Ploughshares Fund, the largest U.S. philanthropic organization dedicated exclusively to nuclear security. Did you know that for as little as $5 a month, you can help reduce the threat from nuclear weapons in the Trump era and beyond? We want everyone to know about this opportunity, especially Press the Button listeners. If you don't give already, please consider going to ploughshares.org/donate to set up a recurring donation. Please choose an amount appropriate for you. 100% of your tax-deductible giving will be put to immediate use on a regular basis, supporting the smartest people with the best ideas for reducing and ultimately eliminating nuclear weapons, stopping their spread, and building peace in regions of conflict where nuclear weapons exist. Every dollar you give goes directly to the programs we support, with nothing subtracted for fundraising or administrative costs. Please, if you have not done so already, go to ploughshares.org/donate to set up your recurring donation today. If you are already a donor, thank you for your support. We couldn't do it without you. No gift is too small or too large. Thank you.
I'm delighted to be here with Ivo Daalder, the president of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs and the former U.S. ambassador to NATO from 2009 to 2013. Before Ivo was appointed to NATO by President Obama, he was a senior fellow in foreign policy studies at the Brookings Institution. And you and I were neighbors when I was at the Carnegie Endowment.
Indeed.
Well, thank you very much for coming in, Ivo.
No, it's great to be here. Thanks.
I'm going to read more of your biography. Ivo is also taught at the University of Maryland School of Public Policy, was the director of research at its Center for International and Security Studies. He was the director for European Affairs on Bill Clinton's National Security Council staff from 95 to 97, and he's the author or editor of 10 books, including The Empty Throne, America's Abdication of Global Leadership. He is now a regularly published columnist in the Chicago Tribune. I was just reading your recent article, NATO Cracks in the Alliance. We'll see if we can get to that in this interview.
Well, it's great to be here, Joe, and we'll
we'll have a whole conversation about what's happening in the world. So
we'll run right through it, but I want
Sounds
to
good.
start off by talking about lessons learned. You and I were both on the Obama security team in the 2007-2008 period leading up to his election. You were the head of the nonproliferation team. I was one of your minions working on memos and papers. And I was wondering if you could just kind of walk us through what you did back then to prepare the candidate to become president and what you thought was necessary for developing the nuclear policies of a new administration. And looking back now on where we fell short, what are the lessons we can bring from that for the next administration?
So this was kind of a unique experience. In many other campaigns, there would have been a team that focused on arms control or on non-proliferation policies with regard to Iran and North Korea, or how to deal with the Russians, or before that, even with the Soviet Union. But here we had a candidate who pretty early on in his tenure as a candidate made very clear that he thought that the world would be a better and a safer place if it didn't have nuclear weapons. Now, Ronald Reagan believed that more as president than as candidate, but Barack Obama believed it as a candidate, and he believed it as a president, and that was different. Now, he was enabled by this because of this very famous article of the Four Horsemen, Kissinger and Schultz, Perry, and Nunn, who argued in the Wall Street Journal in, early 2007?
January 2007.
Right, saying that the world would be a better place if there were no nuclear weapons. Right. And so he said, hey, who am I to disagree with this, and actually made this part of his pitch. And in almost any speech he ever gave, when there was a part on foreign policy, rebuilding alliances was critical, but getting to a world without nuclear weapons was very important. So part of what we tried to do is put meat on the bones of that statement. What does that really mean? How do you get to it? What are the issues? Why is this important? And we worked meaning a good large team, including you, Joe, on coming up with ideas and policies to implement that. It was very much focused on the policy area. So we came up with the idea of the Nuclear Security Summit.
Yes.
The idea that if you control nuclear materials, that isn't a necessary, not sufficient, but it's a necessary step to get to a world without nuclear weapons. We came to the idea of how do you think about the role of nuclear weapons in defense policy, and the idea of that the sole purpose of possessing nuclear weapons is to prevent their use by others. If there's another purpose, if it's to prevent conventional or WMD use, for example, then a world without nuclear weapons might still be one where you want to keep them even if others don't. But if the only purpose, the sole purpose, is that to prevent their use by others, if others don't have them, then you don't need them either. So we put that together. We had a series of papers that we worked around the group of folks, and then I think it was in April of 2008. That candidate Obama put together a meeting in Ohio, and we released a major policy proposal that also had some interesting and important work on biotechnology.
That. It was very exciting.
It was because it sort of said, this is not just a slogan that we want to get rid of nuclear weapons.
It was serious.
It is serious. And indeed, of course, the president in his first major foreign policy speech in April of 2009 in Prague talked about the peace and security of a world without nuclear weapons. And the Nuclear Security Summit gets announced there, as well as, of course, a new arms control initiative with regard to the Russians. So it was exciting to putting this together. Now, translating ideas that are generated in a campaign into policy and action is a very different concept. And I spent some time in the transition trying to figure out how do you take what we had come up with during the campaign to say, how do you move that forward as an issue now that you are in administration? How do we get to the reality? The speech was one big piece of that. The other critical piece was having the right people in the right places. And deciding what our priorities were. And we can talk about
how do you think we did on that? So looking back in hindsight.
So looking back in hindsight, I think we made two errors. One error was that the first actionable piece beyond. The first actionable piece was the Nuclear Security Summit, which is an important announcement. But the second was the aim to have a New START agreement. And so we put a lot of effort on trying to get another arms control agreement with the Russians. But arms control, as Tom Schelling and Mort Halperin, when they wrote about it in 1960, would tell you, is not the same as disarmament. Mm-hmm. Arms control is about managing a conflictual relationship between two entities, in this case in the nuclear era, and learning about and stabilizing the relationship between the two. That is not the right framework if you want to get rid of nuclear weapons. And so the moment you pushed in this direction was the moment you actually also limited your capacity to take other steps that would have allowed you to move towards a world without nuclear weapons. I'll give you a very concrete example. As the ambassador to NATO, I pushed quite hard for really rethinking our nuclear posture in Europe. I realized that you couldn't go from where we were, a few hundred nuclear weapons that we had in a number of countries to zero in one step. But I did think that reducing that posture, perhaps even unilaterally, as we were going to the review conference for the non-proliferation policy in 2010, was a good idea. Yes. And that we should maybe go from, a few hundred to just 100 or whatever the numbers were, but to do it unilaterally. And while people all agreed that that was not a bad idea, in the end, we decided not to do this. Because the State Department and others said, I'm trying to get New START ratified on Capitol Hill. And if I'm at the same time unilaterally withdrawing nuclear weapons in Europe, I'm going to undermine my capacity and my argument for ratification of New START. And indeed, the ratification of New START leads to one of the biggest buildups of our nuclear arsenal we've ever had, yes. Right? Which you know more about than anyone else. But that's the deal that we know always is that if you want to get an agreement through the Senate, you probably have to modernize what remains. Right. And it's been like that since 1972.
There has to be a payoff for the labs.
For the labs.
Bill Clinton, when you and Bill Clinton
wanted
the Comprehensive Test Ban Treaty, one of the compensations to the laboratories was increased money, increased funding. So the labs then took the money. We never got the treaty. And in this case, the Senate took the money.
We did get the treaty.
But we did get the treaty.
Yeah, we did get the treaty. And you can argue whether this was the right or wrong thing. Yes. From my perspective, right, I actually think that if your goal was to get rid of nuclear weapons, if you wanted to move in this world that the president laid out in the campaign, and I think he continued to believe while he was in power,
yes,
the putting New START first make that goal more difficult. So that was one sort of lesson learned, and the argument, and this is an argument that Jan Lodell and I wrote about in our foreign affairs piece on the logic of zero.
And a very compelling piece, the logic
in 2008.
Of zero, and you argued that the organizing principle of U.S. nuclear policy should be the elimination of nuclear weapons. And that was the strategic objective.
That was the strategic, and that there was, and how you got that is through the idea of sole purpose and control of nuclear materials. Yeah. But those are the two concepts of how you got there. So we explicitly said, do not start with Russia. Mm-hmm. Because they need to maintain nuclear weapons. They're going to be the most difficult to convince not to give them up because it's the only thing that makes them a power. Mm-hmm. And what do? We start with Russia. That was one mistake. The second mistake is you do have to have critical people who believe in the vision, in the positions that matter. So the most important positions were, of course, in the State Department, in the NSC, and in DOD. And it's not clear to me that at any of those levels that we have people who fundamentally bought into the notion, as the president put it, that we should seek the security and peace of a world without nuclear weapons. And you could see that in the NPR, the Nuclear Posture Review. So the Nuclear Posture Review had to be developed in 2009, and it was written largely by folks in DOD because it's a tasking to DOD. And it was your traditional NPR in the first draft. Because it was written by people who didn't believe in it.
Right. It was a status quo document.
It was a status quo document.
Fine.
It looked everything's fine.
Let's moderate around the edges.
We need to play around here.
Yeah.
And so that document then then it went into a different process.
Yes.
Different people started getting involved because the White House said, this is not where the president is.
Yeah.
And I played a small outside role because I was at NATO. I didn't have a formal role, but I was asked by key folks in the White House to spend some time looking at it. And Jim Miller was part of it, and Ellen Tauscher, Derek Chollet,
Bob Einhorn.
and Bob Einhorn, in order to write it. And if you look at what the NPR that actually came out, it was a paradigm shift.
Yes.
It's a fundamental paradigm shift.
Right.
It starts with the threat of nuclear terrorism and the threat of nonproliferation. Those become the issues that we should be most concerned about. It doesn't start as traditionally, we need nuclear weapons to deter attack. Deterrence is chapter 4. Mm-hmm. It's not chapter 1. That is, it's a lesser reason why. So we need to think about nuclear weapons, about the challenge they pose as weapons, rather than the challenge that others' capability poses to us.
Right.
And that was a paradigm shift.
Yes.
And I still think that document is something that should have been generated early on and should have been the guiding principle from where we were. And of course, on some of the decisions that we made, which is kicking the can down the road on sole purpose, for example, we made the wrong decision in my view. I think we should have embraced sole purpose in 2010. Becomes a little bit more difficult to do in 2019 or 2020.
So let me fast forward now. Let's imagine that the Democratic candidate wins in 2020, enters the White House. What should she or he do? Knowing what you went through, do they come out of the gate with changes, with, for example, declarations of sole purpose? Do they make cuts to the budget they just inherited, what would be Trump's 2021 or 2022 budget? Where should the appointments be? Where are the key appointments that people have to look for? And finally, do you do a nuclear posture review? Or is that a mistake? Should you be doing a strategic deterrence review that includes all the elements of American power and American statecraft that is not authored by the Pentagon, but is an interagency process? But those are just some thoughts that people have advanced. What do you think?
So I think you have to start with the reality that 2020 is different than 2008. And just geostrategically. Yes. We are living in a different world. In 2008, the relationship with Russia was problematic, but not necessarily as confrontational as it is today.
Absolutely.
And clearly, Russian military doctrine is a very different animal in 2020 than it was in 2008.
They weren't occupying Ukraine, for
They
example.
weren't occupying Ukraine. They had, although they had tried to occupy and were occupying part of Georgia, of course. But the kind of blatant use of military power that we've seen by the Russians, and the kind of exercises in which they consistently exercise the use of nuclear weapons against allies and indeed against ourselves, hadn't happened yet. China was a different political and strategic challenge than it is today. Although China is not, I don't think, a major nuclear player, it still seems to have a minimum deterrent kind of posture that it used to have. It's more survivable today than it probably was in the mid 2000s. But it is a stronger, more important power. I don't see any Democrat repeating the kind of language that Barack Obama did in 2007, 2008 when it comes to a world without nuclear weapons.
Right.
That may be aspirational in the way that it, frankly, has been aspirational for American presidents from Truman onwards. But for Barack Obama, it was operational. And so I think you're going to come into this administration without the operational guidance that what we need is to set us on a course to get rid of nuclear weapons. I don't see that happening. So that's change number one. So, but change number two is I still think there are a lot of things we can do that make the world a safer place, that are consistent with keeping open the possibility of getting to a world without nuclear weapons. And I would argue number one is sole purpose. I think it is very, very fundamental to the way we talk and think about nuclear weapons, that we think about them in only one way, that the only conceivable use of nuclear weapons is to deter their use by someone else. And there is really no other point at which we would, or any president would, consider using nuclear weapons, but to affect that calculus. And I think that's an important embrace. That's got to be driven from the commander-in-chief. It therefore has to be driven from the White House. And I would encourage the next White House NSC, if that's where the president is to make that part of a PPD, a presidential policy directive, or whatever these things are going to be called in the next administration, but a presidential policy direction to the entire administration, that it is the policy of the United States that we have nuclear weapons for the sole purpose of preventing the use.
And do
by
that
others.
early, not
very
wait.
very early.
Let me dig down into that for a second. When you say sole purpose, what does that mean? Does that mean the president would also be saying we would never use nuclear weapons first? Does it have some kind of impact on deployments of forces? What does that mean?
So what sole purpose means is that your planning process is based on the idea that you have weapons for the purpose of deterrence of nuclear use.
Yes.
Does it mean first use? I don't know. And it doesn't. And by the way,
so it doesn't necessarily rule
it doesn't have to be it doesn't lead to a no first use policy per se, as long as you have nuclear weapons, and as long as the other side knows you have nuclear weapons.
So what practical impact does it have on the way we configure our forces or
well?
the budgets?
So it means it means you can have much more limited forces. You are no longer thinking about how to prevent a conventional war or how to prevent the use of biological or chemical weapons, which leads you to operationally disperse your forces in a whole variety of different ways.
Alert status.
Different alert status. You can actually go. You could have a what Ash Carter used to call a delayed second use. Right? That is, you can think about your operational status in a different way. Right. It might include a no first use policy.
Yeah, okay.
I'm not particularly a fan of it because I don't think that anybody believes.
But it lays the foundation for reduction of forces, change in alert status,
and probably eliminates the triad. There's no reason necessarily to triad. If there's an argument technologically why you wanted to maintain the triad, you could make that argument, but I think
meaning the case for ICBMs starts to disappear under this.
Certainly for non-mobile ICBMs. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. So then what? So that you make that declaration.
You make that declaration. You then give real guidance to both the Defense Department on the military side and the civilian side, and whether you have an NPR or strategic deterrence review or whatever review you had, the going in position is not whether we should have sole purpose, which was what it was in the Obama administration, but now that we have sole purpose as the reason for our nuclear weapons, what does that mean operationally? And the kind of questions that we just talked about are the kind of questions you would pose in order to do a posture review. At NATO, we didn't do a nuclear posture review. We did a deterrence and defense posture review.
Yes.
And one of the things that we pushed through there was that deterrence was not based just nuclear weapons, but you would have deterrence was based on a mix of conventional, nuclear, and missile defense. Missile defense was part of the deterrent posture.
Yes.
Focused on Iran, but could by now focused on Russia, quite frankly, as well, could be part of that mix. So I do think you need to start thinking about how do we have the entire posture.
Yes.
And
how do we capture it?
And how to relate it to, but only if you push sole purpose as part of that.
Yes. Any other steps?
Well, the other big thing is let's have a real discussion on arms control.
Yes.
And while I come from the tradition to strongly believe in the edifice of arms control that has been put together over the last 50 years. I do think maintaining New START, now that we have it, is extremely important. Frankly, less because of the numerical limits and more because of the inspection and verification regimes that gives you insight and confidence, et cetera.
Yes.
I believe in dialogue as a means to talking to our potential and actual adversaries. But I do think we have to have a serious conversation. Do we really want another START agreement with the Russians? What do we want to do with the Chinese? How do we think about these kinds of things? Aren't we better off actually focusing on other things like nuclear material control, and saying, well, if we can account for the nuclear material that exists around the world, and we can account for where it is, and we can control it, aren't we then better off on a non-proliferation perspective? And could we bring the North Koreans and the Iranians into such a regime? And by the way, the Israelis, rather than going, which is the first knee-jerk reaction of Democrats in particular, is let's have an arms control agreement with the Russians where we can lower numbers. That seems to me is a paradigm that puts strategic deterrence.
So we still might go ahead and reduce our force numbers, but we just wouldn't do it in the treaty process anymore.
You don't necessarily have to do it, but
because
you do want inspections.
You do want inspections.
You want confidence building. You want the confidence that comes from knowing what the other side is doing.
So we might find a way to decouple verification and inspections from numbers.
Exactly.
Because it doesn't really matter if they have 1,500 and we have 1,000. That's still plenty to deter.
Right. So you need to decide what you need for the deterrence.
So parity doesn't matter.
You need to decide what you want for deterrence. Parity may matter from a political perspective.
Yes.
Politics matters.
Yes.
You can't say it
understood.
doesn't. But it shouldn't be the driving force.
Good. Okay.
Which is, I think the mistake was not only to go for New START. It is that what we really needed in 2009 was to maintain the verification, data exchange, transparency regime,
which had expired,
which was about to expire.
Yeah.
And rather than focusing on 50-50 or whatever, it is how do we maintain that edifice?
Good. Let me ask you one question, and I got something else I want to talk to you about on personnel. You were at that time one of the possibilities for National Security Advisor, and I personally was surprised to see you go to become ambassador to NATO, and a little disappointed because I wanted you here in Washington guiding this process. Is this part of having the right people in the right positions? Do you think things would have been different if you had stayed here? I'm ambassador to NATO. If I had been offered the ambassadorship to NATO, I would have taken it. So I'm not criticizing your choice. I'm just wondering how that impacted the policy.
I wouldn't have been the National Security Advisor. There were plenty of people who wanted to be National Security Advisor who didn't get it. But I would have played, I think, and thought going in, and in fact, as part of the transition process, developed a position within the NSC structure. That was something that the coordinator for WMD proliferation was something that I was interested in and thought I was moving towards. I'll be honest, at a point into the transition for some weeks into the transition, when I raised, when are we going to make some decisions on this? The answer I got back was, it's not a done deal. In fact, it's a jump ball about who's going to get that position. And then when shortly thereafter I was asked to go to NATO, I said, well, that one I can have. I mean, I was offered a number of different positions at DoD and state. And both for, two fundamental reasons why in the end I did that. One was family reasons.
Yeah. Yes, I know.
And I had 2 young boys.
Yeah.
And it's tough enough to work in the White House and come home, but doing it in Brussels is a little easier. And the other, frankly, was deep down, I am as transatlantic as one can get. I was born and raised in the Netherlands. I had lived half my life in Europe and half my life in the United States when I was appointed NATO. I embodied, in a literal sense, the transatlantic relationship. And to be the U.S. ambassador to an organization that sort of I wrote my PhD dissertation on this, and my master's dissertation, and my bachelor's honors thesis all on NATO and nuclear weapons issues. This was pretty close to being unique.
Right.
But do people matter in this kind of thing? Yeah, you do want to have people who share the president's point of view.
Yeah.
And I don't think we necessarily had people in key positions who did, or who believed it as strongly as he did.
Yeah.
And therefore were driving in a different direction than we did.
I can't let you go without asking you about the Afghan papers. I mean, a big part of what you did as ambassador to NATO was ensure NATO unity around the Afghan war. You've been reading the Washington Post series. What are your takeaways? What do you think?
So I'm not surprised by anything that we're reading there. I mean, I think that's the idea that this was a hard and difficult and complicated set of issues that deeply divided people inside the administration, that the strategy after 18 years has not been a total success. In fact, it's not been a total failure either. I mean, Afghanistan is a different country now than it was in 2001, as Ryan Crocker just wrote recently in the Washington Post. But I do think the time has really come for a fundamental rethink. And when that rethink comes, it is about what is it that we're trying to do. And are we trying to build a new country? And if that's what we want to do, and we want to have an Afghanistan in which everybody can go to school and the economy works and et cetera, we need to have a 50 or 75-year commitment. And it's going to take that long. And it will take financial and military and diplomatic and other resources. If we're not prepared to do that, then what else can we do? Well, how can we prevent Afghanistan from becoming, returning to being a safe haven for terrorists who could strike against the United States? And then finally, we got to do this with our allies. I mean, we forget in this country that our allies have been there from day one. And they have fought and died alongside of ourselves. You recall that when the president decided to call off the negotiation of the Afghans in September because an American had been killed by the Taliban. Alongside that American soldier, a Romanian soldier was killed. And that just reminds you that 1/3 of all the foreign forces that are deployed in Afghanistan are non-American. They're European, they're Australian, they're from New Zealand, they're from Georgia, they're from all over the place. And they've been with us and all along. And I would hope that as we develop a new strategy, which we need, we do so in concert with our friends and allies who've been standing beside us.
Excellent reminder. Excellent. Ivo Daalder, thank you for your voice. Thank you for taking the time to be with us today. Thank you for your service to the nation.
My pleasure. Always good to be here.
Thanks for listening to Press the Button. This podcast is produced by Delphine Vigil, Zach Brown, Derek Zender, Alex Spire, and Will Lowry. Sound design by Derek Zender. Audio engineering by Derek Zender and Will Lowry. Research by Alex Spire. Our theme song is by Lyrics Born and the Poets of Rhythm, sampled with kind permission. Additional music by San Francisco-based bands 17 Evergreen and the Society of Rockets. To continue the dialogue and support our work, visit ploughshares.org.